Dear all, I would like to start by thanking the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak to you here at the 2021 Munich Conference on Scholarly Publishing about my experiences with the implementation of the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment. And I'm quite sure that the majority of you attending the Munich Conference are very well familiar with the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, in particular this general recommendation that we should not use journal-based metrics such as journal impact factors as surrogate measures of the quality of individual research articles to assess an individual scientist's contributions or in hiring, promotion, or funding decisions. In addition to this general recommendation, there are of course also 17 specific recommendations directed at various stakeholders in research evaluation processes. When taking into account what this general recommendation actually says, in my mind, one of the most important things that follows from this is the need for an institution to be more transparent on what they define as quality in assessing research output, and also the fact that research output can be so much more than just journal publications. I think it's nevertheless such that it's important to keep in mind that an institution that has signed the San Francisco DORA Declaration has made a commitment to applicants applying for, say, positions at this university, that they will be evaluated on the basis of these principles, and that the announcement text, for instance, will give indications of how quality will be evaluated, and that this can potentially also differ from different positions. But it's still important to realize that there is also a number of institutions that haven't signed the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment. So for a young researcher, it's still a bit challenging to maneuver in this landscape, and of course there is still a certain resistance to take the full consequences in what this means in terms of actually doing science better for the science community as a whole, and that is, in my mind, a very strong incentive to continue to work to have even more institutions sign the declaration. I will give two perspectives on the implementation on research assessment of the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment. One is from the point of view of an institution. Until August 1st this year, I was the pro-rector of research here at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. And in my period as pro-rector, the institution signed the DORA Declaration. But also I want to give the perspective of having been the chairman of evaluation panels for funding bodies that had signed the DORA Declaration, both how we did it in practice and also, in my mind, the consequences for the discussions within the evaluation panel. But let's start with the institutional perspective. What we had to do, basically, when we decided we wanted to sign the DORA Declaration, was to identify what are the processes we have at our university in which we actually evaluate research output. And for our university, we saw there were 4 cases where we evaluated research output. One is, of course, the hiring of new staff, scientific staff members. This can be PhD students, postdocs, researchers, or new faculty members. But it's also such that when we have PhD students that have finished their graduation work and they want to have their PhD thesis defended and approved, there is also an assessment of the quality of that scientific work. So it's also important that this is following both national guidelines as well as the DORA principles. At our institution, we also have the opportunity, or our scientific staff have the opportunity, to apply for sabbaticals. This is a much desired perk at working here at our university. So it's much sought after, and that also means that we will have to occasionally to prioritize between different researchers, and one of the things we then look at is their research output. And finally, we do have some instrument for distributing funding, where also research output is part of the evaluation. Nevertheless, there is a formal rules and set of rules and regulation for these processes, and it's not very difficult to change these so that you, at least formally on paper, subscribe to the DORA principles. So basically, if we take as an example, our hiring processes, we have in our evaluation guideline highlighted the fact that in evaluation that we use for hiring or promoting scientific staff, acceptance into PhD programs, or in awarding research funding, we play an emphasis on quality, relevance, and impact of the research that has been done, but not on the channel of publications in accordance with the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment. And we have also made sure that this is highlighted in the announcement text for new positions at our university or internal processes amongst our faculty. So that is, in a sense, the easy part. Of course, it has to be approved by the appropriate bodies at the university, so it takes a little bit of time, but otherwise, this is the easy part. The difficult part is to make sure that we actually adhere to these principles in the evaluation process. And here, of course, we do meet Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast, which, as we all know, but also the fact that there is a number of evaluations that's being conducted every year at a large institutions. We hire a large number of new faculty or PhD students every year, and there's also then a large number of evaluation committees. And these are, to a very large extent, composed of foreign or external members. But we do have one thing in common for almost all of these committees, namely that we do have an internal faculty member that is noted as being administrative, so not taking actively part in the scientific evaluation, but can point out certain administrative aspects, such as the principles that are part of the DORA declaration. So we can focus on training the local committee members, and that's a more manageable task than training all these external evaluation panel members. This is, of course, a benefit we have for our evaluation process, and would, for instance, not be possible for a funding body where basically the evaluation panels are composed all of external members. But nevertheless, whether you're a funding institution or a university like us, I would recommend, and that we have done here at our institution, to prepare a small instruction video, at least for the chair of the meeting, but ideally that all of the members of the committee can see, where you highlight the principles of the DORA declaration and what you want them to pay attention to and how to evaluate research quality and the kind of output that you value for the given position, as laid out in the announcement text. Now, I also had the great pleasure of chairing a couple of evaluation panels for an external funding institution that have signed the DORA declaration. I think this has given great benefits to the evaluation process, and I will highlight this on the next slide. And my experience in terms of making this work, because not all panel members are equally familiar with the DORA principles or are equally subscribing to them, is to spend a little bit of time in the early parts of the meeting to discuss the difficult questions on how do we evaluate this research quality. How do we, can we agree on the principle that are still within the DORA declaration, and that we all are acknowledging actually measures scientific quality in a much better way. And I think and a very good part of this is that this will also involve all members of the committee, even though you have, say, a spokesperson for selected proposal and so on. Nevertheless, it will be important during the evaluation discussions to also stop discussions when they start diverging from the basic DORA principles, which they might or might not do, all depending on the members of the panel. So make sure that whenever you start discussing specific journals as more important than others, that this is actually not what you are supposed to do. If you succeed in making this happen, my impression is that we get a much better discussion of the science of the individual proposals and the research output. We get a much broader involvement of the committee members. And in particular, I would say we get a much more equal and fair treatment of research at different career stage. And I would like to think, although I can't document this, that this also leads to better quality of the selected projects. Finally, I would say we still have a couple of challenges left. It is still difficult to evaluate scientific quality of papers, and I do believe the answer to this is more open peer review. And also evaluating the quality of other scientific output than papers, such as databases or software. That they exist, fine, but their quality is much harder to assess. So we still have a little bit of work to do in fully implementing this. So, and I very much look forward to discussion afterwards on how we can make progress on these elements. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention.